All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this NABCA webinar, which is titled Using Technology to Inform Alcohol Regulatory and Enforcement Practices. Before I introduce our speaker, Skylar Genist, I wanted to address a few housekeeping notes. And I guess I should also introduce myself. I'm Maggie Barshini. I'm Director of Communications for NABCA. So I wanted to welcome you all again to the webinar and to let you know that this webinar is one of a series of several planned through 2019. We've got another webinar addressing U.S. alcohol regulation in January, so you can stay tuned for details about that. Pam Erickson, a former regulator and researcher, will be the presenter for that one. And another webinar addressing the increase in alcohol-related emergency room visits with Dr. Aaron White of the National Institute of Health is scheduled for April. So again, stay tuned for details. So now back to today's webinar. This webinar will last about 1 hour. However, if there are a lot of questions, which we hope that you do have, and attendees don't mind, we can stay a little bit longer to answer these questions. And if you do have a question, I encourage you to type it into, some may have a chat box or some may have a question box, and I'll be able to see them. And at the end, I will come back on and have Skylar answer those questions for you. Let's see, the presentation is being recorded, and it will be available through nabca.org, our website, within 7 to 10 business days. You can find it under the Resources tab. So now on to our presenter. I'd like to just say a few things about Skylar. He joined the University of Vermont Police Department in 2005. By 2012, he was promoted to detective, becoming responsible for all major investigations. He was hired by the Vermont Department of Liquor and Lottery in 2013. His responsibilities included investigations of regulatory and criminal violations. In August 2017, Skylar was appointed as chief and assigned as the director of the Office of Compliance and Enforcement. Skylar continues to innovate liquor enforcement by placing emphasis on intelligence and leveraging technology to modernize the regulatory environment. Thank you for being our presenter today, Skylar. Now give me a second and I'm going to change to handing over the webinar to you.
Okay.
And let's see, audience viewing. Let's see, where did that go? Pardon me while I figure out how to hand the file over to Skylar. Sharing. There we go. Change presenter. And Skylar, it is now coming over to you.
Okay.
There we go.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Maggie. I appreciate the introduction. I just want to take a real brief moment to thank Maggie for setting this up, and additionally just thank NABCA for allowing me to spend some time with you all today and talk about some of the innovative stuff that we're working on here in Vermont. Additionally, thank you all for taking the hour to take a peek. I'd like to start before I jump in the presentation and just let everybody know that I'm condensing a lot of this into an hour to give you kind of a glimpse of what we're doing, and this is kind of a high-level preview. However, I caveat this entire presentation by saying I am not an IT guru, I'm not a computer programmer or designer, I'm a knucklehead police officer with a badge and a gun and an idea, and I was able to pull this off with relatively little resources, and we'll talk a lot more about that as we go forward. But I say all that to just kind of sell it home that nothing that I think we pulled off here in Vermont is anything that you would have a hard time exporting to your own locations if this approach makes sense to you. So I just want to make myself available ahead of time. I know we'll leave some time for questions as we go on today, but I encourage just reaching out to me if I can help with it all or any of this that you'd be interested in. So like Maggie said, Skylar Genest with the Vermont Department of Liquor and Lottery, and I make it a point to say the full name as we recently were changed, the department name changed as we merged with our Division of Lottery July 1st of this year. Just a little about me, like Maggie said, I am a full-time sworn law enforcement police officer in Vermont. I began my police career in 2005 at the University of Vermont. I served in some supervisory roles there before ultimately becoming the only full-time detective at that organization. And I was there until 2013 when I took a job with the Vermont Department of Liquor Control at the time. As a liquor investigator, I was assigned to our North Central area, where I conducted liquor and tobacco investigations for several years until I was promoted to chief in August of last year. I mentioned that I'm not a computer programmer, although full disclosure, I do have a little bit of background with technology. I did begin my bachelor's degree program at the University of Vermont in computer science. So I come from at least a pretty strong background of IT and computer technology. However, certainly law enforcement has risen as my focal point in my career. I want to take a little bit of time to talk about my department, the Department of Liquor and Lottery, what it is, and that kind of will give some context as to what Project Rabbit turned in for us. So the Department of Liquor Control, or now Liquor and Lottery, is comprised of 4 separate but related offices. The first is the Office of Compliance and Enforcement. The second is the Office of Education, the Office of Licensing, and lastly, as a control state, Vermont has a retail division where we directly sell spirituous alcohol to our public through agent contract stores. I am going to be focusing today on my office, the Office of Compliance and Enforcement, and really just talk about some of the innovations that we've made in the realm of our compliance and our investigative and regulatory inspection work. So what you're looking at here is my team. I like to show this picture for a couple of reasons. The first is just to kind of give you a really quick graphic view of the size of my office. So you're looking at everyone assigned for the entire state of Vermont. These are all of our sworn liquor investigators. The second reason why I like to show this image is because I always like to give full credit to the team for any of the successes that this program has brought to our office in the state of Vermont. Without their willingness to embrace innovation and truly, be willing to upend years of past practice and ways of doing things, we would have failed before inception. So I always like to just kind of briefly give a thanks to my team every time I present on this topic. So law enforcement duties as in the Office of Compliance and Enforcement, we are full sworn law enforcement officers with the same authority as the state police in Vermont, which means we can effect arrests for any and all crimes. However, our office has a specific focus on our Title VII laws in the state, which revolve around the sale of spirituous alcohol, malt, Guinness, and tobacco products. We have looming some cannabis legislation in the state, which will potentially become an issue for us. We've had no bills officially entertained yet in the legislature. However, our Governor's Regulate and Tax Committee has suggested that our agency, who's been engaged in this practice since 1933, has probably got the right skill set to engage in the regulation and enforcement of cannabis laws. But being the first state to do this, at least our legalization as a total legislative agenda, you really have no guarantees of what this will quite look like. So we anticipate an interesting year in our legislature. So again, my division, the picture you saw earlier, is comprised of 11 field investigators, and each individual investigator covers an area of responsibility dispersed across the state. We take our public safety mission very seriously, and we focus on the social responsibility piece, especially being a control state. Knowing that our division engages in the retail sale of alcohol, we do that knowing that there is social cost to society in engaging in that. So generally, we put a lot of emphasis on our social responsibility. Really simply put, we just endeavor to ensure that responsible sale and service of alcohol is kept in the forefront amongst our licensees. So my division, as I mentioned earlier, is complemented by a robust education division. Our state mandates that all of our sellers and servers take a training offered by the department or a third-party trainer every 2 years, and we've got some metrics that show that that's has some positive outcomes for our community. We have a dedicated licensing division, and at any given time, the state has around 1,600 active alcohol licenses, but with our temporary permits, we can swell to as high as 7,000 outlets in any given day. My division, the Office of Compliance and Enforcement, we operate in 3 key focused programs. The first program is our compliance program. The second is an inspection or regulatory audit program. And lastly is investigations. So I'm just going to take a couple of seconds and break down each one. I know at least some of the attendees have similar arrangements in their states, but what you'll find with liquor enforcement is it varies widely across the country. So I just want to give some context for all of this. Our compliance program on both the alcohol and the tobacco front is primarily comprised of undercover UB buys, which looks like us recruiting minors, which we employ and send into establishments to attempt to purchase alcohol or tobacco products underage. Our inspection program is mostly comprised of unannounced site visits where liquor investigators perform a regulatory audit, ensuring compliance with all of our state laws and regulations. And lastly, our investigations routinely focus around complaints we receive from the public, as well as supporting other state and local law enforcement partners with supplemental investigations. Some good examples of that, you may be familiar with source investigations where maybe some criminal activity such as a DUI stems from a licensed establishment. In those scenarios, my investigators support the local law enforcement with source investigations and just aid that potential DUI case or other criminal case with additional investigative resources. So goals for today. What I'd like to achieve for all of the attendees today is just kind of give you, like I said, that high-level overview of what Project Rabbit is and how we are using it in Vermont, and direction for Project Rabbit in the future. And really crucial for you all attending is how this approach can be adopted in each of your own local areas. So given those goals, let me just state that what I really would like to do is just kind of detail for you all paradigm shifts that we've instituted in the way that we collect, analyze, and use data to drive our decision making here at the Office of Compliance and Enforcement at a very, very operational level on literally a daily basis. And I have some opportunity to show you our live stream of the data, and I can show a demo for you today exactly how we use this data. So here's where we'll start. The problem statement that I encountered when I was promoted to chief very simply broke down as you see here. So when I took on the role as a director, the first challenge that I saw, and this is not unique to Vermont, and it's a matter of fact, it's a constant within almost every law enforcement agency, was that my resources were finite and limited at best. Vermont is in the grips of a very, very complex opioid crisis, and vying for state resources and enforcement is difficult. Public opinion certainly puts a lot of emphasis on the opioid problem, and I'm not disagreeing with that. But I think statistics can support certainly the dangers of alcohol sometimes outweigh or can overshadow some of those underlying causes there. So knowing that I certainly wasn't going to get any additional resources, my job was simply to just figure out how I could do more with less. So additionally, another problem point was that we covered a generally vast geographic area as a state level entity. So Vermont, even though it's a very, very small state, we do have 9,600 square miles. And the joke for us New Englanders up here is whenever you try and ask directions from a local, you'll get the response of, oh, well, you can't get there from here. Travel in the Green Mountain State can be very difficult. We have a number of mountain ranges. North and south travel sometimes is easier than east and west. So figuring out a way to disperse my investigators statewide and adequately cover problem areas, knowing the limitations of geography, was certainly a challenge. Additionally, you see my problem of our large outlet universe. So with over potential 7,000 outlets serving alcohol and tobacco in any given day, it becomes very incumbent upon myself as a director to ensure that I'm allocating resources to areas that need our attention the most. You may know, or you may not know, that Vermont, for several years running now, has been ranked as the highest, the number one state for number of breweries per capita. We have a very booming craft brew industry in the state, and what that means for our citizens of the state is that alcohol flows just as freely as the maple syrup in the spring up here. Matter of fact, our economic services division in the state has listed our craft brew industry as a bigger economic driver in Vermont than maple syrup, which may be surprising because Vermont is fairly well known for its maple syrup. But even more surprisingly is it's on a 5-year trend to outpace our ski industry as far as an economic driver. So all of that is to say that alcohol plays a huge role in Vermont society. The next biggest challenge that I encountered as I took the job was data collection where it existed was inefficient at best. And I jokingly admit it, I am a millennial. Being a millennial, I struggled with some of our processes here in regards to data collection. And I am not exaggerating to say that a lot of it was done with a pen, a paper, and a clipboard. And that can cause a lot of problems when you try and leverage data as a force multiplier. And that last data point there kind of speaks to that last statement. Data collected, when it was collected, really went nowhere. So those were the biggest challenges I observed. So even though data was one of those challenges, I knew early on that data was going to be probably the best approach to kind of overcome those challenges. So I mentioned earlier, we had an incomplete or non-existent data collection by my investigators for all 3 of our key programs. And because of that, we were really unable to develop a picture of alcohol issues statewide. So I mentioned the clipboard and the paper and the pens. We certainly did collect data at times, but the sad fact of the matter is those forms ended up in bankers' boxes and filing cabinets. And that's kind of where they died. And I saw a really huge opportunity lost there to use that data to help better allocate our resources where they were needed the most. And the last point, and I'm going to illustrate this for you with some of our live data in a little while, is that investigators were applying our compliance and inspection models horribly inefficiently. We had an existing paradigm in the state where there was an expectation that every one of our licenses received basically the same regulatory attention, regardless of the type of license they were or where they were located. And it's kind of an unfair paradigm. As you can imagine, Vermont being a very rural state, we have a huge bed and breakfast community, a cottage industry, if you will. No pun intended, and to expect that those licenses serving maybe a case of wine a year, we're going to present the same regulatory issues that maybe a busy college bar would, or even some of the unknown outliers may present, was a really kind of a false paradigm. So we decided to change all that. So in late 2016, we drastically redesigned our workflows and the way we did business and restructured everything we did with a clear and concise goal of data collection. And more importantly, collecting data in a way that would lend itself to rapid and easy analysis. Again, collecting data for the efforts of just collecting data really just doesn't cut the mustard. What's more important is collecting data in a way that it can be useful. So this was kind of the inception of Project Rabbit. Now, obviously, this is an acronym. People either love it or hate it. It stands for Resource Allocation Based on an Intelligence Toolkit. And what we said, really the concept for Rabbit was, for years we've been kind of crawling around in the dark, making assumptions about where should we be directing enforcement resources instead of letting data make those decisions for us. So the upside was that this would lead to a more efficient use of investigators' time, and the decisions would certainly be objective and defensible. So knowing the acronym, let's talk about what it really comprises of. So Rabbit is 2 individual applications. The first is a mobile app that we configured to collect our data for us. And when I say our data, I'm talking about every single data point that you could potentially imagine we are collecting via a very easy to use iOS mobile app. Everything from our compliance data to literally the fuel consumed by our cruisers, we collect all of the data from that via that app. And then the second application is off-the-shelf software that we use to visualize, interpret, and drive decision-making. And what that allows for is data-driven allocation of resources to areas of the state that needs it the most. So we knew that this program was going to have two steps to begin with, so we started with probably the hardest one right away, but we really needed to start kind of baby steps. So the first goal was to just completely do away with paper. Paper only increased our inefficiencies and workflows. It didn't lend itself to any real data analysis, and frankly just drove this millennial mad. So I started surveying the landscape for the development of an application that investigators could use to collect data. And what I found was rather than putting out an RFP for a very expensive in-house data collection program, there were some off-the-shelf user configurable applications on the market that were very cost effective and able to very easily be manipulated and kind of somewhat tailored exactly to what we wanted to do. So from May 1st of 2017 onward, my division uses no paper at all. We don't collect we generate any paper from our work. So our mobile data solution, and there's a video here, but I'm going to skip over it. I'm going to tell you I'm not a salesman for any particular software, and I will be the first to tell you that there is a whole universe of applications out there that can achieve the same goal. My department landed on an application called FastField, which is produced by a company called Merge Mobile. And really simply, it is a form app that allows you to configure forms for data collection. And this particular program had some upsides as opposed to some others, and we'll talk about those. So the first was that FastField was cost effective. So it was $13 per user per month, and that's not, it's a monthly billing cycle. So as my staffing levels may change, that fee structure changes accordingly. It is iOS, Android, and PC functional, meaning I didn't have to add any additional hardware or any sort of infrastructure investment. We were able to institute this with the equipment that my investigators already had. The application, and this was a huge sticking point for us in Vermont, works without a full-time data connection. Vermont, again, is very rural, and it's frequent that you don't have cellular connectivity. So I needed to ensure that we had an app that was able to collect data but wouldn't lose any data with ebbs and flows in cellular connectivity. There'd be nothing more frustrating for my investigators than to have to deal with the reality of maybe lost data. And the last piece is that FastField had a configurable API which allowed for automated and seamless data uploading. So the upside really for FastField for us was that it could integrate with our in-house licensing software. And that is a feat, because our in-house licensing software was developed in the early 80s. It's a COBOL programmed kind of one-off licensing application that up until just 2 years ago ran on physical tape deck servers in our building. We have since virtualized that server. However, the program still exists as a command line interface, very painful to use program. But the beauty is that even given that reality, it still can configure and talk with FastField, our mobile application, which was a huge win for us. Prior to bringing on FastField, my investigators had no way to real-time verify licensing data in the field. They had to hope and pray that the licensee was abiding by the regulation and posting their license on the wall, because at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, they had no good way to verify whether or not that license was in fact valid. But now investigators have that ability in the field. So the second step, the second application, involves data modeling and what we lightly call predictive policing, and I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. But in late 2017, we were collecting data in a large enough scale to move on to that second step, to start analyzing the data and having it paint the picture of alcohol issues for us. So again, I mentioned earlier, the goal was to leverage, again, off-the-shelf software, particularly business intelligence software, to visualize and interpret all of that data that we're collecting. So I mentioned it somewhat simply earlier, contemporary public service just really demands that any agency strive to do more with less, and we were no exception there. So knowing that, it was my responsibility to ensure that I could leverage every tool I could. So I started surveying areas of state government that did the most work with data, and I landed with the Agency of Transportation and met a couple of programmers there. In early 2018, I met one programmer in particular who was really doing some kind of innovative work with AOT's data. Now, if any of you are familiar with your agencies of transportation in your states, they are fans of data, and they collect heaps of data on everything from road surface to traffic flows to bridge infrastructure. They kind of live and breathe in the world of data. So what I was able to do was figure out kind of how they were leveraging technology. And one program in particular explained to me what he was doing with predictive modeling in an application called Power BI. Now, Power BI stands for Business Intelligence. It's a Microsoft software. And essentially what it allowed our Agency of Transportation to do was to develop an algorithm that could weigh the predictive coefficients, and that's a big word. It could essentially take a look at any data point and assign a number to that data point for predictive likelihood of failure. In particular, with road infrastructure, they could take a look at a road surface survey, and based on all sorts of related data sets, things like weather, traffic flow, substrate infrastructure, all of the kind of really nuanced data sets about roads, they could use those relationships in the data to say, given everything we know, projecting it out in the future, here's the likelihood that we're going to have a failure in this particular location. And I thought that was really innovative. So I asked, if that works for civil engineering, can we kind of use this for social science? If I can collect enough data on any given license, can I leverage the same algorithm to tell me where and when a violation of law or regulation is most likely to occur? And I expected a really funny look and them to tell me no way that could work, but they actually said, oh yeah, absolutely, we can pull that off. So I started working with them to kind of learn my way through Power BI and how to build an algorithm. And there's a video here that I'm going to skip for the sake of time. It's just a demo video for Power BI, but I encourage you to give Power BI a Google. It's a really powerful program. So by mid-February of 2018, Microsoft Power BI began generating a list of licensed establishments in Vermont with a predictive coefficient of likelihood for future violations. So I know I'm using some really high-tech, crazy math words here, but I'm going to do my best to explain this to the point where I can understand it, because again, I mentioned I am not a math guru or a researcher. I'm a knucklehead police officer. So the algorithm is fairly multidimensional and lengthy, and basically Greek to me, but I'm going to give you a Cliff Notes version of what it really looks like. So a license is quantified by its geographic location in the state, considering factors such as population density, DUI arrests per capita, and licensee density. And the next thing that happens is the algorithm checks to see what the past historical incidence of violations of law or regulation looks like, and covered during the history of our inspection or compliance programs. If there is a history, the coefficient increases. And then the algorithm looks at the data to determine if the licensee has ever received a complaint from the public or been the target of one of our internal investigations. And again, the coefficient is weighted accordingly. And lastly, the algorithm takes a look at some associated data sets and some time-related data sets. So factors like when was the last time one of my investigators went into the establishment? Apologize. And again, that algorithm is weighted accordingly. And as the algorithm development continued, we found other related data sets that we weren't quite aware of, and we're going to show you some of those in just a little while. But the bottom line is that the higher the coefficient climbed, the more we believed the probability of future incidents of violations. And therefore, we strategically identified those licenses as places where we needed to apply educational or enforcement resources. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute. But here are the upsides of Power BI. Again, I'm not a salesman for Microsoft. There are other programs on the marketplace that are very similar and do a lot of the same thing. But the first upside was that it was cost effective. We pay $9 per user per month, and we only have one licensing fee. And the only reason we have a license fee with Power BI is that we can publish it to our website. If we didn't do any publishing with it, it would have been a completely free program for us. It is iOS, Android, and PC functional. Again, we had no capital expenditure as far as upgrading equipment. The last two were the crucial ones. It allowed for a completely automated uploading and refreshing of data. So once we were able to configure the algorithm and set the software to connect to the live data sets, we didn't have to manually update anything. A data gateway through Power BI allows it to just automatically refresh. So in many ways, it's a living and breathing organism now at this point. And the last data point is, again, it's customized as new data sets are connected to new research supports, when new research supports how we should apply our resources. So as we were developing the algorithm and looking at the data sets we were connecting to, I've always been very candid and frank that it started with some just hunches, some guesses at what we thought made sense. But as we continued to develop it, we started to kind of question ourselves and said, whoa, let's pump the brakes. There's got to be a science or public health-based approach that can make this a little bit more meaningful. So I was actually very fortunate to connect with Dr. Pamela Trangenstein at some NABCA conferences, and as well as get tied into some resources from the NLLEA, and found that there was some great research going on that actually could have some serious impact on the way this algorithm is weighting our licensees. In particular, looking at outlet type, access to alcohol, and violent crime, and the link that Dr. Trangenstein did with Johns Hopkins and in the paper that she published there, Alcoholism, Clinical and Experimental Research. Additionally, there were some National Institutes of Health studies that had some impact, and we just decided, well, there's no reason to rely on hunch. Let's kind of root this in some science-based approaches. And we've actually worked with an epidemiologist who is on staff at our Burlington Police Department, our biggest city's police department, who's taken a look and evaluated our algorithm and given us some great input as far as how and why we should weight some of the different disparate data sets. So without further ado, let's take a look at Rabbit Live. So I'm going to transition this now to a browser window. And the first thing you see, I'm glad it's pulled up, this is our state website, so Department liquorcontrol.vermont.gov. The important thing about Rabbit is that we've made all of this data publicly available. We did that very purposely for a couple of reasons. One, none of this was secret squirrel. It would all be available to a Public Records or Freedom of Information Act request. And additionally, we found that there's a lot of utility to making this data publicly available. And I'll explain that as we kind of take a look at it. So I clicked on our link for compliance and enforcement, and right down here at the bottom of this page, you're going to see Project Rabbit. Refresh and pull live. So I'm going to full screen this so that we're not killing our eyes to take a look at what this does here. So what we're looking at is what we call the welcome page. This is a dashboard that every investigator uses on a daily basis to, again, formulate that picture of alcohol issues across the state of Vermont. So the beautiful thing about Power BI is that the data becomes very pliable and very easy to manipulate. So as I bring my mouse over, I can filter this by a number of different ways. I can filter it by investigator, and all of the data pertinent to that individual investigator is filtered and presented. So what you see over here to the right is a list of our top 3 licenses based on that algorithm that I talked about earlier. So these 3 licenses have a coefficient of the highest coefficient of licenses assigned to Sergeant Andy Tebow. And we'll dive into strategic inspections in just a minute. Additionally, you see a couple of pie charts here, visualizes both our tobacco and alcohol compliance rates for Sergeant Tebow's area of responsibility. And this is, again, real-time refreshed. So our last update, there's a slight delay, but last update was about 12:34 this afternoon. So this would reflect any compliance activity that Sergeant Tebow would have done up until a little after noon today. You see a couple of maps here graphically representing our active complaints in Sergeant Tebow's area and recent DUI activity as well. So again, this is rapidly updated. It's frequently fresh data, and our investigators use this on a daily basis. So the way this works is they log into this welcome page, they see their top 3 to inspect. If Sergeant Tebow was to go and conduct a regulatory inspection of any one of these licensees right now, the results of that inspection would then play into the algorithm, and this list would refresh and change accordingly. So we're going to jump in, we're going to walk through a couple of pages, and I'm going to show you a couple of areas where we've leveraged this data analysis to kind of help, again, further deepen that picture of alcohol and tobacco issues in Vermont. So as I slide one page to the right, we get our tobacco compliance data visualized. This is all going to be filtered at this point for Sergeant Tebow because it's remembering the filter I applied. So this isn't statewide. I'm just going to jump back one page, clear that out so we can take a look at statewide data. So again, statewide tobacco compliance data, you can see since October of 2017, we've done 1,246 tobacco compliance checks. We get some metrics and statistics on our compliance rate as well as activity by town, by jurisdiction. This is helpful not only for us. We have, again, a state statute that says we have to apply a tobacco compliance check to every one of our tobacco licenses, but we also have a ton of community stakeholders that want to know how retailers are responsibly selling regulated products in their community. So this data was really useful to our community coalitions and local control commissioners to kind of conceptualize what in their individual jurisdiction, what tobacco sales looks like to minors. So if they click on any given town, data is refreshed and up to date for that town. Next page is a checklist that our investigators use. Again, I mentioned we have a statutory requirement to apply a compliance check to every tobacco license. So that's used by my investigators to ensure that we meet that statutory requirement. This page is our alcohol compliance data, very similar to our tobacco compliance, just giving us some metrics on when and where we are applying our alcohol compliance program. Similar, just like there's a checklist for tobacco licenses, this is a checklist for our alcohol tobacco licenses, so we know when and when the last time a check was performed at that license. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this page because this has been a kind of an eye-opener for us. So this is all of the data collected from our regulatory inspection program. First of all, you can see a map of all of the activity. The app that we use collects GPS coordinates. So each time an investigator performs an inspection, it drops a pin on the map for us. We can get some metrics based on time. And this is kind of interesting. I'm glad the filters, it remembered the last time I filtered this. So right now we're looking at a time frame of May 1st of 2017 to right around May 1st of 2018. So this is the data set prior to our strategic inspection model. You can see we did around almost 4,000 inspections in that time frame. We collect data on our licensee contacts and public contacts. This pie chart here was a big eye-opener for us. So I mentioned earlier that there was evidence that showed that our inspection program was being applied pretty inefficiently. And this is one of the key performance indicators that we use to make that determination. So you can see this is violation rate per inspection. So of 100 inspections, you can see that we only observed a violation in about 2%. So out of 100 inspections, only 2 of them really resulted in an observed violation. Now, what this told me is not that we were not good at observing violations, because we issue plenty of tickets. We certainly see them. What it told me most is that it's also not reflective of the fact that there weren't a lot of violations out there. What it was reflective of is that we were just simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. So the idea with resource allocation based on data is let's use the data to tell us when and where to go. So I'm just going to filter this data to reflect the time frame, and the data is refreshing right now. I'm going to just manipulate this over to right around May 1st of 2018 and let the data refresh. And it's still working. It's getting late in the afternoon on the state network, so I'm sure everyone's finishing up their day. So the data is refreshed now, and you can see in that time frame, that 2% jumped to 11.21%. And realistically, we didn't change anything other than letting Rabbit tell us where to perform our inspections. So a pretty significant increase there. The only other thing I want to mention, I'm going to talk a little bit about it more in just a minute, but this doesn't mean we wrote more tickets. As a matter of fact, since the same time frame, we actually issued more written warnings and we've issued less tickets. And I'd like to think that's because we're using this not as a guide to tell us where to. It's not a revenue generator. It's not about where we can write more tickets. I don't necessarily need the data to do that. What we look at that is it's given us a great opportunity to educate our licensees on issues and get to places where they frankly need education. So I am running a little bit short on time. I want to leave plenty of time for questions. I'm going to go two places real quick. I'm just going to jump to DUI data. And the reason I show this is because while this is certainly useful for our algorithm, this became incredibly useful for our licensees. So we actually take this data in with us during our educational programs and our inspections, and we share this data with our licensees. And what we found is that almost universally, when we ask bartenders who gets arrested for DUI leaving your community, almost universally they would say, it's the 21-year-old new drinkers. They don't know how to do this responsibly. They make all bad decisions. And similarly, almost always the case, that's not your highest percentage of person getting arrested for DUI. So this allows us to kind of analyze and break down our DUI data by jurisdiction. And we'll go into a location. I'm going to pick one that's got some fairly busy DUI activity. And we'll go to that bar and we'll ask them that question: who gets arrested for DUI leaving your establishment? And again, they'll say the 21-year-old, and we'll show them the data, and we'll just the reaction on their faces is somewhat priceless. So what we'll go in and show them is that actually, statistically, it's your 28, 24-year-olds and your 56-year-olds are getting arrested in your community, and they're getting arrested around, let's see if right around 3:25 in the morning is the high time, and it looks like on Saturdays at around the 16th day of the month. So we can really drill down deep into the data. And what we find is that these licensees are blown away by this. They say, we've been cutting the wrong people off. It's the 30-year-olds and the 56-year-olds that we'll give the extra drinks to, but we're cutting the 21-year-olds off. So this is just eye-opening data that's really powerful to share with our licensees. In a couple more minutes, I'm going to dive into our strategic inspection dashboard, just to kind of show you how the algorithm plays into where we go. So again, if I select an investigator, Sergeant Andy Tebow, for example, the data is going to filter to those licensees that the algorithm has strategically focused on. And this kind of gives you a snapshot of why they are strategically focused. So this quote unquote points column here, that's that coefficient that we use, that the algorithm produces. And if I click on any given one licensee, the data will filter and tell me why. So Montview Vineyard in Corinth, Vermont, it's risen highest on the top of our list because we haven't been there in a long time. Additionally, the location it's in is quantified as a risky location. And that's, again, based on outlet density and DUI arrests per location. So let me be really clear. I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint. So Rabbit's got some room to grow, and it's going to continue to evolve as time goes on. Place a Last Drink is a program that's being brought to Vermont with the help of the NLLEA and NHTSA, and we think that being able to inextricably link DUI arrests to licensed establishments is certainly going to help our model. Additionally, we're going to use Rabbit to help quantify some data in regards to trade practice violations. And I know I throw that word around because in liquor law enforcement, trade practice seems to be a buzzword. But we certainly believe that there's room for it to be assist us in our investigations going forward. Here's all the things that we're doing with place of last drink data. In the sake of time, I'm going to skip over it, other than to say we really believe it's going to improve our model. And this is an area where we really feel like our program can be developed. So we're doing a very, very rudimentary container-based model as far as outlet density across the state. The CDC has a guide for measuring alcohol density that really puts a lot of emphasis on some more quantitative measurements. In particular, spatial access would be very, very useful in helping us quantify any given location. So we are actively working with some epidemiologists and some GIS analysts who can potentially help us get there. And we think that that's only going to, again, strengthen our model. So how can this approach work for other agencies? And again, I know it was a high-level discussion on what we're doing here, but I think there is utility in just the process that we used across the country. So first step, really evaluate your organization's ability to collect meaningful data that really lends itself to analysis. I think you're missing great opportunities if you don't take a look about how your workflows lend itself to analysis. And then expand your association, your connections to data sets that may or may not be your own. It can often be a big lift, but once we started to see what was out there in the state for data, it really strengthened our model. For a quick example, the health department has a program called Counterbalance that does a detailed inventory of our licenses that sell risky products like flavored tobacco products and Alco Pops. And connecting to their data sets also strengthened our data. The next step, I suggest looking at using intelligence software to find relationships amongst your data, because it's really a force multiplier. And then lastly, incorporate this data-driven approach to tackle a problem you might have. And I know this may seem scary, but I always quantify it like this. I have about 100 hours of programming time into this entire program, and our capital expenditure at this point is well under $3,000. So we were able to pull this off with almost no resources, and it's certainly been a game changer for us. So with that, I think we have some time for questions, and I think Maggie's gonna kind of curate the questions and speak them out, and I'll address them as they come.
Yes, I will. And we actually have had a couple that have come in. This one is from Mina. If the data is available to the general public, do they also see the list of top 3 establishments on the officer's to-do list as well? If so, do you want to do them one at a time, or should I read it all and then?
No, go right ahead, read it all.
Okay. So if so, does that ever give an establishment a heads up that a compliance check is about to occur, or are parts of the system hidden from real-time view?
Great question. So the answer is that yes, any public, even the licensees, would be able to see the top 3 establishments, and that we were very calculated in doing that on purpose. We've partnered with a lot of licensees and actually shown this program to them. We believe that operating this in maybe a cloak and dagger fashion behind the scenes really is the antithesis of what we were trying to achieve. My goal, and we've been very clear with both my investigators as well as our licensees, is that despite any licensee being at the top of the list, our goal would be that they never have a violation, because we're able to get there potentially ahead of time and cut problems off at the pass, if you follow what I'm saying. So realistically, it doesn't say exactly when and where we're going to an establishment. It just kind of puts them on that list. And that's just for our inspection activity. We don't do any sort of forecasting of where we're going to apply our compliance model. So they, other than we're coming at some point in time, they don't know exactly when we're getting there. And again, I think a collaborative approach. I would hope that licensees would check this list and have the same sentiment that I have, that, well, despite me being on the top of that list, I'm not going to have a violation because I'm going to pay attention to the way we responsibly sell alcohol or tobacco.
Okay. This question may be very similar to what you already answered, but the question's from Elizabeth, and the question is, are there any savvy licensees out there who use the public Rabbit data to predict when you might do a check?
Yeah, I guess it's maybe a little too early to tell. I don't have any evidence that anybody has done that, but again, it doesn't say exactly when it doesn't say exactly when we're coming in. So even if they checked the list and saw that they were on the top, it doesn't say that your investigator will be arriving at 6 o'clock on a Friday night. It doesn't say that. That's still a little bit of inside baseball. But again, I think there's value in licensees knowing, for the same reason there's value for us knowing all of those predictive values for why there could be violations.
Okay. This one is from Derek. I am providing prevention to communities in an area similar to yours, opioid crisis versus alcohol enforcement. Tips on engaging community members, parents on this issue? Question, do you have any, I assume, do you have any tips for that? It continues. Not focus only on opioids, but also to focus on ATOD. That's the end.
Okay, so I'll start with, do I have tips? Well, I guess I would also turn that back on you. Do you have any tips for me? It's a struggle for sure. I'm a big data fan, so we have a pretty robust youth risk behavior survey in the state, and consistently over the years we see high rates of risky alcohol experimentation early on in our youth, long before they engage in more risky opioid exploration. So realistically, I like to say that, and not to be cliche and call alcohol a gateway drug, but focusing on risk behavior. Alcohol seems to be an area where youth learn to engage in risky behavior. So if we can work in education, if we can work in prevention, and certainly in enforcement and keeping the youth access down in regards to alcohol, I'm a firm believer that it reaffirms and supports risk aversion. So I use data quite a bit. That's always been a fan of mine, but it's a struggle. And I will apologize. I'm not quite familiar with the acronym that he used at the end of the question.
ATOD.
If anybody wants to clue me in here, maybe.
Yeah, I know I've heard of it before, but I'll be honest, the acronym in terms of what it means is not coming to me. So if somebody knows that, if you can please come in. All right, so I've got another question from a Cassandra H. Did you have trouble transitioning your field staff to the new model from paper to no paper?
Did I have trouble? I would say that there were certainly some skeptics in the crowd, and knowing that, frankly, knowing that they were, following under the leadership of a millennial chief, I was going to struggle with cultural clashes anyway. I made it a very clear goal of mine that if this was the solution we were going to use, that it needed to be very reliable and very easy to use, because there's nothing more frustrating than implementing technology for the sake of implementing technology and having that technology just make your job harder. So that being said, I really researched out the tools that we brought on board, Merge Mobile, the FastField product, as well as Power BI, and I just wanted to make sure that it was as painless as technology could be. And I think that was bore out in my presentation when I talked about the offline capability. We make it very streamlined, very easy to use, and that's kind of crucial. But there were some skeptics for sure.
Okay, Skylar, I got clarity on what the ATOD is: alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. So
I got it. Not
focus only on opioids, but also focus on alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Thank you very much.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, I think I covered that. My biggest tip is use data. I wouldn't say that that's a panacea either. It's a hard element of what we do here in prevention and certainly in liquor law enforcement is vying for attention in the midst of all of these other struggles and challenges.
Okay, and this one is from Cassandra G. Can you talk about if there's been any political blowback from this tool? How upset were licensees?
We did a couple of focus groups where we showed some of this data to licensees, and there were certainly, again, just like our investigators were a little bit skeptical, I think some of our licenses were skeptical too. But I think what helped in regards to somewhat winning them over is that we did make it public facing. Again, this wasn't cloak and dagger. We didn't have private dossiers on licenses. We made this, this is as open and transparent as possible. And I think I said it a couple times now. My hope is that licensees are coming to this project and taking a look at this data. Again, it's not about writing violations or where I can go to write more tickets. I don't really need a program for that. I need the program for putting my resources where they will make the biggest impact. And that's the goal. And if that's achieved by, maybe some self-regulation, some self-policing by licensees coming to the data set, learning about their area, learning about the risk factors present there, and then maybe adjusting their business practices based on that, that's a win. That's a win without expending any resources, realistically.
Okay, we've got several more. This one's from Elizabeth. Any public interest in the rabbit data and the public wanting to frequent more responsible establishments? So do you see an incentive for establishments to look good on rabbit?
It's pretty early on, and we haven't. And we did certainly field some concerns about the insurance industry. Again, nothing visualized here would be exempt from a public information request. So if an insurance company asked about the information, or a citizen asked, what's the safest bar in my community, and they asked for specific data regarding to that, we're required by law to provide that anyway. So we're just making it very easily available up front. I don't know of any specific cases where anyone is using this data as a consumer. But I think there's some utility there, potentially. I know our community coalitions are interested in having the data for recognition for responsible sale and service. So licensees that pass our compliance checks based on the alcohol compliance and tobacco compliance page of Project Rabbit, they get recognition from the community for essentially doing their job well. So I don't think I answered that question real succinctly, but no, I don't have any specific information about consumers using it.
Okay, a couple more questions here, and I know we are close to that hour signal. So it's from Sandra. Our county seat has a college, and we experience a lot of underage drinking and fake IDs. Do you receive data about alcohol poisoning from EMS and hospitals?
So that has been a very, very tough challenge. I want nothing more than to connect to what's called our siren data in Vermont, but our Department of Health, and rightfully so, is very protective of their data. So finding a way to kind of aggregate the data without releasing potentially HIPAA-related information has been a little bit of a struggle. So right now I am not accessing EMS data, but it's on a high priority for me to be able to quantify locations based on that. But you did mention fake IDs, and I'm going to just spend just a quick second and jump back over to Rabbit. And we use some technology to help us interdict fake IDs, and we visualize that data here, which is helpful for us to kind of future plan where we will apply our fake ID interdiction resources. So you can see year to date, we've scanned 939 fake IDs, and we've detected 875 fake IDs. And we can see a breakdown by state here. So we use this to visualize that data, and you can see when we seized those fake IDs, dates, and times. So we use this in planning for other fake ID details. Again, I don't know if I answered that question 100%. We don't have EMS data yet, but we want it, and we do quite a bit of work with fake IDs.
Okay. Another question. This is from Tamara. Are you integrated with the licensing department in Vermont or only enforcement?
Yes, well, we are separate offices, but we are integrated into their data set. So our app real-time connects to our licensing database. So our licensing division is made up of civilians, they're non-law enforcement officers, but we have access to all of their same data.
Okay. Let's see. I apologize if you're hearing that. My computer is chiming in with some emails. Let's see. A couple more. Okay. It looks like actually we've answered all of the questions. I just want to make sure I'm scanning that question box. So if you've got a question and I missed it, please retype it. Um, Otherwise, I'm just going to begin to wrap up our presentation today. Oh, here we go. Is your complaint process online, and how does that feed into this tool?
Yes, so we do receive online anonymous complaints. The way we handle that is we have we use a CAT RMS system that is utilized statewide for all law enforcement agencies, that we actually access that data as well for our law enforcement specific data. So when a complaint comes in on an establishment, we punch a CAD case or a RMS case, and that data feeds then into Project Rabbit. Additionally, we receive complaints from people who walk into our office. We receive complaints through the mail. We're a very open agency in regards to how we receive complaints.
Okay. Some more came in, so thank you guys for your interest. We're going to continue. If you're able to stay on, please do. If you need to leave, thank you very much for attending the webinar. This is another one from Derek. Speak to how you and the NLLEA were able to get POLD integrated into Vermont's DUI protocol.
Yes, so let me be pretty specific. Our PLD project with NLLEA is not limited to DUIs. It's actually all open to all law enforcement calls for service. It's in a pilot right now. We're only actually working with one select law enforcement agency. I'm hoping that it will gain traction and spread. So the way it works is the NLLEA, through some funding from NHTSA, has a online place of last drink database. And law enforcement officers from this pilot agency, when they encounter individuals who have been consuming, and that place of last consumption was a licensed premise, they report through that database, and that database then dumps the information into Project Rabbit. And I don't know if you saw on the welcome page, but I'll actually navigate us right back to there. You can see place of last drink data. This is a little bit in beta test right now, but it arrives here. So our investigators, every time a new place of last drink report pops up, our investigators can see that and then follow up on that complaint as well. As far as DUI arrests go, I'm actually working with our state forensic lab, who manages our DMT data masters, and we are adding a place of last drink question to that data master program, similar to what Washington State does to collect place of last drink data at the time of DUI arrest. But that isn't quite live yet in the state.
Okay. And I've got one more question for you to answer. This one's from Michael. How closely do you work with community collaboratives? And if so, what can they do to make your efforts more effective? How closely do you work? Oh, it's a repeat of the same question. Okay, so yeah, that was one question. It just was repeated twice.
Sure. We are always increasing our relationships with our local coalitions and our local prevention organizations. As far as, I think those relationships are getting better as time goes on, and we're finding synergies in ways that we can help each other out. As far as I think the question asked, how can they help us do our job better? Specific to Vermont, I think education is an area where we could certainly use a lot of help. We're very limited in our education resources. I have two people. We have two people in our Office of Education. So given, it's very easy for us to use this data, and because it's publicly available, I believe that this data could be used by anyone. So prevention groups could do focus groups with their licenses in their community, and they could do a deep dive into this data and maybe even go further than we could ever really go. Instead of asking, getting to the root cause issues potentially, we kind of are triage, I guess, if you look at it in some ways. We want to stop the bleeding where it occurs, but potentially I think that prevention organizations have the unique ability to really address maybe root issues and kind of suss out what's deeper than even what I'm visualizing here in the data, and address that. So certainly education, I think, is an area where we could use some plussing up.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you guys so much for hanging in there, for all of your questions, and thank you, Skylar, for your time and for sharing your valuable knowledge with us on this NABCA webinar. If you have questions, if anyone still has questions and we did not address them, or if you think of something afterwards, you guys have Skylar's contact information and you have my email address. So feel free to send it to either one of us, and I will make sure Skylar gets it. Also, please visit the NABCA website at www.nabca.org for various resources, including white papers, previous webinars, and other materials. And just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the website, same place, on the resources on the NABCA website in 7 to 10 days. And again, teaser, we've got 2 more webinars coming up, one in January and one in April. So if you're interested in receiving that invitation, please send me a note as well. Thank you guys so much. The webinar is now going to conclude, so have an awesome evening.